Take the money, Miss Hartley, and have done." The Duke of Westmere set a folded bank draft on the almshouse table between them, and a hush ran down the long stone room, as though someone had drawn a cold hand across the back of every neck in it. 12 old women sat at their suppers, with their spoons stopped halfway, the candles guttered in the draught from the door he had left open behind him. Beatrice Hartley looked at the draught, and at the close black ink of his signature, and at the breadth of the hand that had pushed it toward her. And she did not pick it up. She folded her own hands instead, one over the other, the thumb pressed flat. It was a small motion. He would not know what it cost her. "You have come a long way for your supper, Your Grace," she said. "The mutton is gone cold. May I send for fresh?" "I have not come for mutton." He stood at the head of the table, as though it were his own, which in law it nearly was. The land under the almshouse floor belonged to Westmere, and every soul in the parish knew it. He was younger than she had braced for, 26 perhaps, no more than a year past her own age, and the youth did not soften him. It sharpened the impatience, the way a new blade is keener than an old one. His indigo riding coat was wet at the shoulders from the summer rain that had come and gone over the downs that evening, and it had not occurred to him to take it off. "That draft will keep these women in a sounder roof than your father ever managed. Take it, sign the release of the land to me, and the matter is closed by Michaelmas. And the women will be removed to the parish poorhouse at Tadwick. 3 miles, a clean establishment. I have inspected it myself." Down the table, old Mrs. Pell made a sound, very small, into her cup. Beatrice did not look at her. If she looked at Mrs. Pell, she would not be able to do the next thing calmly, and the only weapon she had against a duke was calm. "No," she said. She said it the way one says a fact about the weather. The candle flame between them stood up straight in the still air after the word, as though it had been waiting for permission. Westmere's jaw moved. Only that, a single flex at the hinge. And Beatrice understood, with a clarity that surprised her, that no one had said that word to him in some considerable time, and that the last person who had was very likely dead. "You misunderstand me, Miss Hartley." His voice did not rise. It dropped instead, which was worse. "I am not asking." "Then we are agreed on something, Your Grace, for I am not selling." She unfolded her hands, smoothed the worn deal of the tabletop, where the grain had gone soft as suede with 60 years of scrubbing, and rose. The motion brought her level with the 3rd button of his coat. She was not a tall woman, and she did not pretend to be. "My father built this house with his own subscription and the labor of men who loved him. He laid the foundation stone the summer I was 9. I will not put 12 old women on the Tadwick Road for a fashionable terrace and a clean conscience, and I will not be the Hartley who hands Westmere back the only thing a Westmere ever gave." Something crossed his face at the name, at his own name, said aloud against him in a cold supper-room, that she could not read and did not trust herself to try. She read it in the moment as offense. She would learn later how wrong she had been, but in the almshouse that evening, with the rain starting again soft against the high windows, she read it as the affront of a man who had never in his life been told the word no by anyone who could not be dismissed for it. He picked up the draft. He did not tear it. He folded it once more, with a precision that was its own kind of anger, and put it inside his coat. "You will reconsider," he said. "I have considered it fully." She came round the table and opened the door wider for him into the wet blue dusk, the long northern light of midsummer still pale on the downs behind him, though the hour was past 9. The smell of the rain on warm stone came in, that particular summer smell, dust-laid and grass-risen, and with it the bleat of sheep on the hill. "Mind the step, Your Grace. It is loose. My father meant to mend it and ran out of years." She watched the Duke of Westmere go out into the dusk with the rejected money over his heart, and she stood in the doorway until the sound of his horse had gone down the lane, and the old women behind her had begun, very cautiously, to breathe and eat again. Then she shut the door and leaned her back against it, and let her hands shake where no one could see them. She had refused a duke, the county would know by morning, and a duke, she had reason to know, did not forgive a thing he could not have. She had not slept past 4 in her life that she could remember, and she did not sleep that night either. But it was not the duke who kept her awake. It was the loose step. Her father had meant to mend it. He had meant to mend a great many things, and had instead worn himself to a shadow, keeping the almshouse fires lit, and the almshouse roof whole, on a subscription that the old Duke of Westmere, this one's father, had pledged in writing, and then, 3 winters before her father's death, withdrawn without a word of explanation. She had been 21 that winter. She had watched her father read the steward's letter at his own desk, by his own candle, and set it down, and say nothing, and go on. He had gone on for 4 more years on nothing but his own back, and then he had stopped going on in March, with the snow still in the lane, and the almshouse had been hers to keep ever since. So when the Duke of Westmere came back into her life that summer, and she had no doubt at all that he would come back, men of his stamp did not lose gracefully. She would meet him the way her father had not been given the strength to. She would not read his letter and set it down. She would answer it. Beatrice knew more about the Duke's father than the Duke could have guessed. In her own father's study, in the bottom drawer of the desk where his unanswered letters still lay, was a slim packet tied in faded tape, 14 letters in her father's careful hand, copied out before sending, each one to the 8th Duke of Westmere, each one more patient and more desperate than the last. She had read them after the funeral by candlelight until she knew them by heart. They were a record of a written pledge made with a flourish and then quietly let lapse when the novelty wore thin. A subscription promised the length of 3 counties and paid on for 2 years, and then withdrawn without a word, leaving her father's name attached to a roof he could no longer keep up. He had worn himself to nothing keeping alight what Westmere had promised to fund. He had died, more or less, of the breaking of that promise, and the sun had ridden down, out of the rain with a larger draught, and the same Westmere certainty, as though money pushed across a table could mend a thing money had broken. And she had told him, in front of 12 paupers, no. So she was not surprised, the next morning, when the surprise arrived in the form of news. She had it first from Mrs. Pell, who had it from the laundress, who had it from a kitchen maid up at the court, that the new Duke kept his father's account books spread on the long table under the windows in the cold hall every morning, before the staff stirred, and read them like a man at a graveside, that he had been heard to say he meant to mend what his father had let fall, not merely seize it, and that he had a thorn in his side in the shape of his aunt. The Dowager Marchioness of Steyne, Mrs. Pell said, with the relish of the very old for the affairs of the great. His father's sister came to govern the court through 3 nephews' minorities, and never gave it back. Dove-grey silk that cost more than our roof, and not a soft bone in her body, by what they say below stairs. She knew your father, Bea, knew him and despised him for being poor and stubborn, which she reckons the same sin. She has told the household the Duke need only wait. 3 winters, she says, and the almshouse falls in of its own accord, and the land comes to him by simple dereliction. No courts, no fuss, no cold mutton. The old woman's eyes were bright and shrewd over her knitting. Mind her, Bea. The young one is only proud, the old one is patient. Patient is the one that kills you. Beatrice minded her. She filed the name away, Augusta, Dowager Marchioness of Steyne, and went on with the day's work, and tried not to wonder why a man who meant only to seize a thing should trouble to call it mending. It was a question she had no business asking, and she asked it anyway, in the back of her mind, all through the bright morning. The banns of the matter would not be read in any church, but the parish carried the news as faithfully as if they had been. By the time Beatrice walked down into the village the next morning, the air already warm at 8, the dust of the lane white and soft underfoot, the hedgerows loud with finches and heavy with the green smell of high summer. 3 separate people had stopped her to say that the Duke had been refused, and that no good would come of it, and that she was the bravest fool in the county. The fishmonger's wife pressed a parcel of herring into her hands, and would not be paid for it. The blacksmith touched his cap, and said nothing, which from the blacksmith was a benediction. And outside the churchyard, leaning on the wall in the sun with his sleeves rolled, the curate's brother Mr. Halloway, who had been at school with half the gentry of the riding, and had a wry, gentle face and not a shilling to his name, fell into step beside her with the air of a man who has been waiting all morning to be entertained. "They are saying," he confided, "that you offered the 9th Duke of Westmere cold mutton, and that he has not been so insulted since his christening, when the bishop dropped him. Tell me it is true. I have had a dull June, and I am owed it." "I offered him fresh," Beatrice said. "He declined, worse and worse. The man cannot even accept hospitality. No wonder his father came to grief." Halloway plucked a stem of grass from the wall and turned it in his fingers, and his voice came down half a register, the teasing thinning to something kinder underneath. "B. He owns the ground under the house. You know that. Refusing a duke is a fine thing to do once. It is a very expensive thing to do twice. Then I had better be sure I am right." She stopped at the lich gate, in the shade of the old yew, where the air was suddenly cool and smelled of the dark earth under the trees. "He means to put them on the Tadwick Road, Edmund. Mrs. Pell is 81. She came to the almshouse the year it opened. My father carried her trunk up the stair himself. I am not going to hand her to a poor house 3 miles off so that a duke can put up a row of houses and call it improvement." "No," Halloway agreed. "All the tea's gone now. No, I don't suppose you are." He looked at her a moment, the grass stem still. "Just be ready for him to come back. He will come back. His sort always does. And next time he will have thought about it, which makes him more dangerous, not less." He was right, and Beatrice knew he was right. And she walked home with the herring and the warning both into the long bright afternoon, and she did not have to wait above 2 days. The summons came on the 3rd morning, by a footman in Westmere livery, so fine it made the village street look shabbier than it was. The Duke of Westmere requested. The word was requested, and underlined, which told her the requesting had cost him something. That Miss Hartley wait upon him at the court, at her earliest convenience, to discuss the welfare of the almshouse inmates. Beatrice read it standing in her father's study, by his desk, where his unanswered letters had once sat. Then she put on her amber gown, which was the only good thing she owned and had been her mother's, and she walked the 2 miles up to Westmere Court in the heat with her chin level, and she presented herself at the great door of a house that had taken her father's life, and she was not afraid. That, at least, was what she told herself in the avenue, under the limes, with the bees loud in the flower of them, and the warm air thick with the scent. She was less sure of it on the threshold. But by then the door was opening, and it was too late to be anything but calm. He received her in a long south room that the afternoon sun had turned the colour of honey, where the windows stood open onto a parterre gone gloriously to seed. Roses blown full, lavender humming, the box hedges grown shaggy for want of a gardener his father had dismissed, and he had not yet replaced. The Duke rose when she came in. He had taken off the riding coat. In his shirt sleeves and a plain waistcoat, with the sun on him, he looked less like an instrument of the law, and more like what he was, which was a young man who had not slept well in a year. He had a paper in his hand. She saw it and braced. "Miss Hartley, thank you for coming." He kept his feet, and so she kept hers, and they faced each other standing across a Turkey carpet worth more than her year's bread. "I will not waste your time. I have had my man draw up a new instrument. The almshouse remains. The inmates remain. Westmere endows it in perpetuity, the full subscription my father pledged, and arrears for every year he failed to pay it, settled at once. In return, you cede only the management of the trust to the estate, where it can be properly funded and properly kept." He held the paper out. "You have what you came for. The women keep their roof. Take it." It was, she saw at once, a far better offer than the first. It was, in fact, very nearly everything she had asked for. And she understood, looking at the clean clauses and the Westmere seal, and the careful generosity of it, exactly what it would cost, and exactly why she could not pay. "You would have the management," she said. "The estate would. Yes, it is the estate's money." "It was the estate's money the last time, Your Grace. My father held the paper very like this one. Endowed in perpetuity, it said. Arrears settled, it said. And one winter your father's steward sent a letter that withdrew it all in 3 lines, and there was nothing my father could do, because he had ceded the management, and the management was the only lever he had." She did not raise her voice. She folded her hands, one over the other, the thumb flat. "A pledge that you may withdraw at pleasure is not a pledge. It is a courtesy. And I have buried a man who trusted Westmere's courtesy." The room was very quiet. Somewhere in the blown roses outside, a bee blundered against the glass and bumbled away. The Duke's hand holding the paper did not move, but his thumb came across and turned the signet ring on his other hand, once, and the Beatrice Marction, without knowing yet what it meant. "You are refusing me," he said, a second time. "I am refusing the instrument. The endowment I would take in an hour, if it were irrevocable, vested in the inmates and not in your goodwill, with the management held by trustees, you could not turn out. Make it a thing you cannot take back, Your Grace, and I will sign it on my knees. Make it a thing that depends on your continued patience with me, and I will not, though you stand there until Michaelmas." For a long moment, the Duke of Westmere looked at her across his honey-coloured room, and she could not read what was in his face, and she did not try, because she had been wrong about his face once already, and she did not yet trust herself to know it. She read it in the moment as cold anger. She was wrong again. But she would not learn that for some time, and so she stood in the wrong reading, and let it make her straight-backed and ready. And when he spoke at last, his voice was very low and very even, and he said the thing she would carry with her for the rest of the summer. "No one refuses me twice, Miss Hartley." It was not a boast. It was nearer a warning he was giving against his own will, the way a man warns you off a horse he knows will throw you. "I do not say it from vanity. I say it because it has not happened to me, and I do not know what I become on the other side of it. I would rather not find out across the body of an almshouse. So I will ask you to think very carefully, and I will give you until the end of the month." Beatrice Hartley looked at the young Duke of Westmere, and at the open windows behind him, and at the wild summer garden his father had let go to ruin, and she sank into a curtsy, a deep, unhurried, perfectly correct curtsy, the kind that is taught to a vicar's daughter, so that she may meet her betters without flinching. And as she rose, she refused him a third time. "I have thought carefully, Your Grace. I thought of nothing else for 4 winters while my father did the same. There is no part of this I have not turned over." She drew on her gloves, the chalk and leather scent of them filling the small space between them. "Make it irrevocable, and you will not have to ask me at all. Until then, no. Mind the step on your terrace. It is loose, like the one at the almshouse. Your father meant to mend a great many things." And she curtsied once more, and walked out of the honey-coloured room into the lime-scented heat of the avenue, and left the 9th Duke of Westmere standing among his ruined roses, refused 3 times in the space of a single summer week, with a paper in his hand that gave her everything she wanted, and that she would not take from his hand because it came from his hand. She did not look back. If she had looked back, she would have seen him still standing where she had left him. The paper lowered to his side, and an expression on his face that was not anger at all. That had not, in fact, been anger in any of their 3 meetings, but she did not look back, and so she carried the wrong reading home with her, down the avenue under the loud bees, and it kept her warm with righteousness all the way to her own door, where it cooled, as righteousness does, into something lonelier. She told herself all the way home that she had won. She had named her price, make it irrevocable, and he had not been able to meet it, and a man who could not meet a price went away. That was how the world worked. She had watched it work that way on her father for 4 winters. She did not let herself dwell on the thing she had glimpsed on his face as she rose from the curtsy. The thing that had not been anger, because to dwell on it would be to wonder what it was. And she had no business wondering anything about the Duke of Westmere except how to keep his hands off her father's roof. But the wondering would not be put down. It walked home with her under the loud bees and sat with her over her solitary supper and lay down with her in the dark. He had said, "I will not make it a gift you can refuse. I will make it a debt I owe." That had not sounded like a man buying a thing. It had sounded. She made herself stop the thought, and then thought it anyway, like a man trying to be different from his father, and not yet sure he could. She knew exactly how that felt. She had been trying to be different from hers. Less proud, less poor, less likely to die of both, and failing at it daily, and the recognition was so unwelcome that she blew out the candle on it, and lay in the heat with her eyes open. In the morning she resolved to think no more about him, which lasted until the 3rd day. He came to the almshouse himself, 3 days later, which no one had told him a duke might do, because no duke had ever done it. Beatrice was up the ladder in the back gallery with a bucket of lime wash, and her sleeves pushed past her elbows when the door opened, and the long room went silent in the particular way it now did whenever Westmere was in it. She knew, without turning, who it was. The old women told her by going quiet. She finished the stroke she was on, a deliberate thing, the brush full and the line clean, before she came down, because she would not scramble off a ladder for any man alive, and she found him standing just inside the door in his shirt sleeves again. No footman, no draught, looking up at the water stain, spreading brown across the gallery ceiling where the roof had gone at last, in the spring rains. "That is the north slope," he said. "The slates. It is the north slope and the slates, your grace, and the lead of the valley gutter, and the better part of one rafter that the damp has had. I have a man coming on Thursday to tell me it cannot be done for less than £40, which I do not have, and then I shall do it myself for 11, badly, and it will last 2 winters. She set the bucket down and wiped her hands on her apron, and waited for him to produce another paper. He did not produce a paper. "Show me," he said, so she showed him. She did not know what else to do, and there was a perverse satisfaction in walking the Duke of Westmere through the whole sorry anatomy of his father's broken promise. The gutter, the rafter, the place in the kitchen passage where the floor had sunk, the casement that had not shut true since the year the subscription stopped. He went up the ladder himself in the end, in his good shirt, and put his hand flat against the wet plaster, and his head back to look up the dark of the roof void, and came down with cobweb in his black hair, and lime dust on his cuff. And Beatrice discovered, to her considerable annoyance, that a duke with cobweb in his hair and his sleeves rolled was harder to keep at the proper distance than a duke with a bank draft. £40 is robbery, he said, brushing at the cuff. It is the north slope, and a fortnight's work for 4 men. I will send Perring, my clerk of works. He kept Westmere Court standing through my father's economies, He can keep a roof on 12 old women without difficulty. He saw her open her mouth and lifted one hand, not in command this time, but very nearly in appeal. Not the estate. Me, from my own purse, with no instrument, no release, no clause, nothing you must sign, and nothing I can withdraw, because there will be nothing to withdraw. The roof will simply be on, and a roof on cannot be taken off again by a letter. You object to my charity because it is revocable. Very well. I will do you a thing that cannot be revoked. The slates do not care whose pride is satisfied. It was, she thought, looking at him in the brown light under the ruined ceiling, an extremely clever answer. And she was almost certain he did not know how clever it was, which made it worse. You may send your Mr. Perring, she said at last. For the roof, only the roof, only the roof. He inclined his head, and then. She would remember this afterward as the first crack in the wall she had built between them. He looked up at the water stain again, and the corner of his mouth moved, and he said, with the gravity of a man, reading a sentence in chancery, My father subscribed to the roofing of 3 churches and the spire of a 4th in his day. He never once paid for a slate. I begin to think the family's true inheritance is the difference between a pledge and a payment. I mean to spend mine on the payment, Miss Hartley, and let the pledges go to my cousins. It was so dry and so unexpected, and so entirely at his own family's expense, that Beatrice laughed before she could stop herself. A short, surprised laugh, gone almost before it was out, and she saw his face change at the sound of it, saw something startled and pleased move across it and be quickly mastered, and she thought, Oh, that is a mistake. That is a great mistake. And she picked up her lime bucket and turned back to the ladder so that she would not make it again. But she had made it, and they both knew she had made it, and the wall between them was a course of bricks shorter than it had been that morning. Mr. Perring came with 4 men and a wagon of slates on the Friday, and the hammering on the north slope became the sound of that summer. The Duke came too, not every day, but often, more often than the roof required, and never with a paper. He came in his shirt-sleeves and stood in the yard with Perring and talked of rafters. And he learned the old women's names, which Beatrice had not expected and did not know what to do with. He learned that Mrs. Pell had been a lady's maid at a great house in Norfolk, and could still, if pressed, describe the dressing of a duchess for a drawing-room. He learned that little Mrs. Dyce was frightened of thunder, and that the others sat with her through summer storms. He sat through one such storm himself, one heavy violet evening when the thunder walked along the downs, and the rain came down warm and straight, sat on the bench in the long room with Mrs. Dyce's knotted hand in his, and talked to her quietly about nothing at all, the price of wool, the bishop's gout. Until the storm went over, and Beatrice, watching from the kitchen passage where she had no business lingering, felt the wall lose another course, and was angry about it, and went on watching. You are staring at the Duke of Westmere, said Mrs. Pell, materializing at her elbow with the uncanny silence of the very old. I am watching that he does not upset Mrs. Dyce. Mrs. Pell folded her hands over the head of her stick. I dressed a duchess for 30 years, Miss Beatrice, and I will tell you a thing about great men that took me the 30 years to learn. The ones who frighten you are the ones who want to be loved and have given up on it. The cold ones, the truly cold ones, are perfectly easy. They want nothing from you, and so they cannot hurt you. She watched the young Duke laugh, low at something Mrs. Dyce had said. That one is not cold. That one is the other kind. Mind yourself, my dear. The other kind is the kind that breaks your heart, because you cannot help but try to give them the thing they have stopped expecting. Beatrice did not answer her. She went and found work in the kitchen, with her hands in cold dishwater, and told herself that Mrs. Pell was 81 and romantic, and had dressed too many duchesses, and did not believe a word of her own argument. The roof went on. It was a good roof. Fearing's men did honest work, and the Duke paid them in coin from his own hand on the Saturday in the yard, where the whole village could see that Westmere had put a roof on the Hartley almshouse, and asked nothing for it. The water stain on the gallery ceiling dried to a pale ghost of itself. And Beatrice, who had braced for a duke to come and take, found she had no defences prepared for a duke who came and gave without asking, and stood in her ruined kitchen passage in his shirt-sleeves arguing with her about the proper management of charitable trusts, as though she were his equal in the matter, which, she was forced to admit, somewhere in the third week, she very nearly was, and he very nearly treated her as. The argument about the management was not their only argument. They argued about the gutter lead, which Beatrice held should be relaid, and the Duke held should be patched, until Perring settled it against them both by the simple method of showing them the cracked length on the ground, at which point each claimed to have meant exactly that. They argued about the accounts, the Duke being of the opinion that 12 old women could not possibly require the quantity of tallow Beatrice's ledger recorded, until Mrs. Pell informed him with great dignity that the old saw their suppers by candle, because the alternative was to take them in the dark like cattle, and that his Grace might try threading a darning needle by July dusk at 80, before he pronounced upon the tallow. The Duke apologized to Mrs. Pell. He did it well, which Beatrice marked, because men of his rank did not as a rule know how to apologize to a former lady's maid, and this one had clearly been practicing on someone. "You enjoyed that," he said to Beatrice afterward, in the yard, brushing slate dust from his cuff. "You stood there and let her flay me, and you enjoyed every word of it." "I did," Beatrice agreed. "It is the chief pleasure left to a poor woman, watching a rich one discover the price of candles. I would not deny myself for the world. You are a hard creature, Miss Hartley." "I am an accurate one, Your Grace. It is frequently mistaken for the other thing." But she said it with the corner of her own mouth wanting to move, and he saw it want to, and he had the grace, this time, not to say so, only to look at her a half-second longer than the slate dust required, and then to turn back to the wagon, whistling something tuneless and pleased, while Beatrice went into her ledger and wrote the day's tallow down, twice by mistake, and had to scratch it out, which had not happened to her accounts in 4 years. It was the whistling that undid her, in the end, more than any of it. A Duke who paid his men in coin, and apologized to her cook, and argued the gutter lead and lost. She could have armored herself against all of that, given a week's warning. But she had no defense at all, prepared against a man who whistled tunelessly in her almshouse yard, because he was, for no reason the estate could bill him for, simply glad to be there. That was the thing Mrs. Pell had warned her of. That was the kind that broke your heart. She knew it, and she went on letting him whistle, and she was angry about it, and she went on letting him. "You keep coming back to the management," he said, one evening. They were in the almshouse garden, in the last of the long light, where the old women's vegetable beds ran down to the wall, and the air was sweet, with the warm green of growing things and the dust of the day settling. He had a stalk of lavender between his fingers, turning it. The scent of it crushed out blue into the evening. "You will not be funded out of my good will. You have said so a dozen times. So tell me, plainly, what shape of thing you would take, not what you would refuse. I have that part by heart, what you would sign." And because he asked it plainly, and because the evening was soft, and because she was tired of being only a wall, she told him. She told him the whole shape of it, a trust vested in the inmates themselves, the capital settled irrevocably, so that no duke and no steward and no letter could ever again withdraw it. The management, held by a board of trustees who could not be removed at the patron's pleasure, the patron's role reduced to the one thing a patron should be, which was a name on a stone and a purse that had already paid. She had thought it all out across 4 winters. It came out of her clear and complete, the way a thing comes that you have built in your head 100 times and never been asked to speak. And the Duke of Westmere stood in the almshouse garden with the lavender crushed in his fingers, and listened to her the way no one had ever listened, to her father with his whole attention and no impatience at all. And when she had finished, he was quiet for a moment. And then he said, "That is a better instrument than any my man would have drawn. You should have been a chancery lawyer, Miss Hartley. It is a great waste, your being merely the cleverest person in the county." "It is no waste at all," she said. "Someone has to keep the roof on. Someone does." He looked at her, and the light was going, and the first star was out over the downs, and Beatrice felt the evening tip toward something she had no business letting it tip toward. "Let me have it drawn. Exactly as you have said it, vested in the inmates, the capital settled past recall, the trustees beyond my reach. I will sign away every lever I hold, and then it will not be my good will you depend upon. It will be the law which does not change its mind in the night. Will you take it then, when it is a thing I cannot take back?" It was everything. It was the whole of what she had refused him 3 times for, and she stood in the garden and looked at the man offering it and understood that the only thing now standing between the almshouse and its safety was her own fear that this was another courtesy that would be withdrawn, and that the fear was hers, now, and her father's no longer, and that she would have to decide whether to carry it or set it down. "Have it drawn," she said. "I will read every word, and if it is what you say it is, then yes, your grace. Then I will sign." "Adrian," he said. She looked at him. "My name. If we are to be partners in a chancery instrument, you may as well know it. My father is in every other thing in this parish. I would like one place where I am not chiefly his son." Said it lightly, but it was not light, and she heard that it was not. "Adrian. It is a perfectly ordinary name. My mother chose it. It is, as far as I can discover, the single decision in this family that no one has ever regretted." "Adrian," she said, trying it, and the sound of his Christian name in her own mouth was as a register. She had held against him from the first cold supper-room, falling open in the warm, dark of the garden, and they both heard it fall, and neither of them said anything about it, and the lavender went on, crushing its blue scent into the air between them. There was one evening, in the last warm week before the paper came, that Beatrice would keep for the rest of her life and take out, in years to come, the way the old women took out their few good things, to look at and put back unworn. It was the parish feast of the patron saint which fell in high summer, and the village kept it on the green with trestle tables and the church bells, and a fiddler who was more enthusiasm than skill, and the almshouse women were carried down in a wagon to sit in the long gold evening light and be waited on for once instead of waiting. The Duke came. No one had asked him. He came in his shirt-sleeves with a cask of his own cellar on the wagon bed beside Mrs. Dyce, and he handed the old women down himself, one at a time by their knotted hands, and he danced the first dance with Mrs. Pell, who had not danced in 20 years and did it badly and gloriously, and the whole green laughed, and so did he, and so, she could not help it, did Beatrice. He danced with her after. She had meant to refuse. It was the one thing she knew how to do where this man was concerned. But the fiddler struck up, and he held out his hand, and said, "I have learned the trick of you, Miss Hartley. If I ask you plainly, you cannot get out of it without a reason, and you have not got one," and she found that she had not got one. And she took his hand, and they danced on the trodden grass, in the smell of crushed clover and wood smoke, and somebody's roasting pig, under a sky going apricot, and then rose over the downs, with the swifts screaming high, and the bells fallen quiet, and the long English summer evening holding the light far past its hour, as though it too were reluctant to let the thing end. She did not think about the management, or the instrument, or her father, or the difference between a pledge and a payment. She thought about nothing at all. She let herself, for the length of one country dance, simply be a young woman of 26, dancing with a young man who made her laugh, in a parish that loved her, in the gold of a summer she would have called the best of her life if anyone had asked her. And no one asked her, and the dance ended, and he did not let go of her hand at once, and the green went on glowing, and somewhere a child was crying for more cake, and it was, she understood even as she stood in it, the happiest she had ever been, or would perhaps ever be, and she did not yet know to be afraid of that. "There," he said softly, when the fiddler had stopped, and not yet begun again. "You danced with the Duke of Westmere, and the sky did not fall. Mark it in your ledger. It will balance against the tallow." "I shall enter it under sundries," she said, "and lose it on purpose." And he laughed, and the bells started up again for the end of the feast, and she carried the whole of that evening home in her chest like a coal in a warming pan, and it kept her warm exactly 4 days, which was as long as it had. The instrument was drawn. Perring's clerk wrote it fair, and the Duke's own solicitor came down from town to argue against it. For it stripped Westmere of every advantage, and gave the estate nothing but the bill, and the Duke overruled him in front of Beatrice in the honey-coloured room, flatly, in 3 sentences, and the solicitor went away tight-lipped to write to the Dowager Marchioness of Steyne that her nephew had run mad. Beatrice read the instrument through twice at the long table, with the Duke sitting across from her, not hurrying her, and she could find no flaw in it, no hidden door, no clause that left him a lever. It was exactly the thing she had described in the garden. It was irrevocable. It was safe. She did not sign it that day. She told him she would read it a 3rd time, at home by her father's candle, on her father's desk, before she put her name to anything that bore the Westmere seal. And he did not press her, which she marked, because the old Duke would have pressed her, and his pressing would have been the thing that proved her right. The young Duke let her carry it home. He stood at the great door of Westmere Court, and watched her go down the avenue under the limes with the instrument in her hand, and the late sun gold on the amber of her gown, and Beatrice, who had not looked back the first time, looked back this time, just once, at the turn of the avenue, and found him still there, watching, and lifted her hand, and saw him lift his, and went home with her heart doing something foolish that she was much too sensible to permit, and could not, that evening, prevent. She read it a 3rd time by her father's candle. It was sound, it was everything, and she sat in her father's study with the pen in her hand, and the Westmere seal under her thumb, and found that she could not, quite, sign it, not from doubt of the instrument, which was perfect, but from the largeness of the thing she would be doing, which was trusting Westmere, after everything, with her father's life's work made safe at last. She set the pen down. She would sign it in the morning, in the daylight, with a clear head. She put the instrument in her father's desk, where his unanswered letters had once lain, and she went up to bed, and for the first time in a great many years she slept past 4, slept the whole short summer night through, and woke to the sound of a horse in the lane, and a hammering at the door that was not the postman's, and went down in her wrapper to find Edmund Halloway on her step, grey-faced in the early light, with a printed sheet in his hand. "Don't read it on the step," Halloway said. "Come in and sit, and read it sitting." She read it, standing in the lane, of course, because no one has ever once obeyed that instruction. It was the county paper, the Tuesday sheet, that went into every gentry breakfast room, from the coast to the chalk. And there was a paragraph in it, unsigned, in the place where the unsigned paragraphs went, the ones that everyone read and no one admitted to writing. And the paragraph was about her. It did not name her, it did not need to. "A certain spinster of the parish of W," it said, "daughter of a deceased and impecunious clergyman, has of late so far forgotten her station as to entertain the Duke of W. In her cottage and his almshouse at all hours and in all undress, the labouring men of the estate being witness to his grace in his shirt-sleeves about her premises on a dozen occasions. And the question is asked, by those who have the young Duke's welfare at heart, whether a nobleman so lately come to his honours is well advised to be so much in the pocket of a managing female of no fortune and less discretion, and whether the famous Westmere roofing be charity or something with a homelier name. The reader will draw his own conclusion. The lane was very quiet. A blackbird sang somewhere in the hot hedge. Beatrice read it twice, and the second time the words seemed to come from further off, as though she were reading them through water. "It is filth," Holloway said, low and furious. "Bay, it is filth, and everyone who reads it will know it is filth. Your father's daughter, of all the women in the riding." "Everyone who reads it," Beatrice said, and was surprised to find her voice steady, "will repeat it by noon, and believe it by Sunday, and cut me by the following Tuesday. You know that as well as I do. Filth does not have to be believed to do its work. It only has to be printed." She folded the sheet, very carefully, along its own creases, the way she had folded the bank draft she would not take, and she found that her hands were folding one over the other, the thumb pressed flat, all on their own. "Who wrote it?" "It is not signed." "Edmund, who wrote it?" Holloway looked at her, and looked away, and looked at the blackbird in the hedge, as though it had the answer. "The talk in the stain kitchens," he said at last, reluctantly, "is that her ladyship dictated a letter to the editor on Friday, and that the editor is her ladyship's creature, and has been since she bought up his paper's debts, the year of the contested election." He met her eyes. "The Dowager Marchioness of Steyne, the Duke's aunt. They say she has sworn the almshouse land will be a terrace of fashionable houses before the year is out, and that she will not see 7,000 a year of nephew thrown away on 12 paupers and a parson's bluestocking daughter. I am sorry, Bea. I would have kept it from you another hour if I could." So it was the aunt. Beatrice stood in the lane, with the filth folded in her hand, and understood, with the cold clarity that came to her in extremity, that she had been fighting the wrong Westmere all along. The young Duke had never been the danger. The young Duke had put a roof on her almshouse, and learned Mrs. Pell's name, and offered her an instrument that gave away every advantage he held. The danger had been standing behind him in dove-grey silk the entire time, patient as a spider, waiting for the moment when the cheapest weapon, a woman's reputation, which costs nothing to destroy and cannot be rebuilt, would do the work that money and law could not, and the instrument lay unsigned in her father's desk. She had not signed it. She had slept the night through for the first time in years, and not signed it, and now there was a printed sheet that made the signing impossible. For what would the county say? What would they not say, when the managing female of no discretion put her name to a deed bound the young Duke's fortune to her almshouse forever? It would be the proof of the paragraph. It would hang him. Every clause she had written to protect the old women would read, in the light of that filth, as the price of her favours. "I have to see him," she said. Not for myself." She was already turning back toward the cottage, already reaching to untie her wrapper, her mind running ahead the way it ran when the roof failed or the coal ran short, fastening on the next necessary thing. For him, he does not know yet. He rides out at dawn. He will not have seen the paper. He is about to walk into a county that has decided overnight that he is his father after all. A Westmere who buys what he wants and calls it charity, and he does not know it is coming. Whatever else is true, Edmund, he has been honest with me, and a man should not be ambushed in his own breakfast room. I am going to warn him. And then I am going to take myself out of his road, because the kindest thing I can do for that almshouse now is to stop being the woman the Duke of Westmere is seen with. She walked up to Westmere Court for the third time that summer in the heat of the morning, with the dust white on her hem, and this time she was afraid. Not of the Duke, but for him, which was a far worse fear, and one she had no practice in. She did not get past the hall. The Dowager Marchioness of Steyne was waiting for her there, in the cold great hall under the windows. But for a moment, coming in out of the glare with her eyes not yet adjusted, Beatrice saw her before she was seen, and saw a thing she was not meant to see. The Marchioness was standing at the far end of the hall before a portrait, the great dim canvas of a girl of perhaps 17 in the dress of 30 years before. And she had one gloved hand lifted to the painted face, not touching it, hovering a half-inch off the varnish, the way one's hand hovers over a thing too dear to risk, and her own face, the composed, magnificent, warmthless face, had come undone in the privacy she believed she had, gone soft and old and stricken with some grief so long carried it had worn a groove she lived in. Then a board spoke under Beatrice's foot, and the hand came down, and the face closed over like water over a dropped stone. And the Dowager Marchioness of Steyne turned, magnificent again in grey silk and her brother's diamonds, beautiful and composed and entirely without warmth, and she did not rise to the meeting because she had never sat. And she did not offer Beatrice a chair, and she let the silence do its work for a moment before she spoke, the way a woman does who has never in her life had to hurry. "Miss Hartley, you have saved me the trouble of sending for you. Sit, if you like. I find I prefer you standing, but suit yourself." She did not wait to see which Beatrice chose. "You have read the paper. I see by your face that you have. Good. Then we may dispense with the part where you pretend not to understand me, which I should find tedious, and you would find humiliating. You are an intelligent woman. Everyone says so. Let us both behave like intelligent women, and be quick, because my nephew rides in at 10, and I should prefer this finished before he does." "You wrote it," Beatrice said. "I caused it to be written. There is a difference, and at my age one is entitled to it." The Marchioness turned one of her rings, a great square emerald, and the morning light moved in it. "Do not look at me as though I had done a wicked thing. I have done a kind thing, Miss Hartley, though you are too young and too in love to see it. My nephew is 26. He came to his honours in a wreck, debts, broken pledges, a name that is a byword for unreliability the length of 3 counties, and he has one task in this world, which is to marry money and rank and rebuild what his father pulled down. One task, and he is throwing it away on a roof and a parson's daughter, because he has discovered, late and all at once, that it feels very fine to be admired by a clever woman who tells him he is not his father. It is the oldest folly in the world and the most expensive. I am ending it before it costs him the only future he has." She turned the great square emerald once more, unhurried. "You may hate me for it. I shan't mind. I have been hated by better than you, and I have generally been right." Every word of it was a blade, and every word of it was placed with the precision of a woman who had been placing blades for 50 years, and the worst of it, the thing that made Beatrice's hands go cold inside her gloves, was that under the cruelty there was a grain of something that was not cruelty at all. The Marchioness believed it. She believed she was saving him. There was a terrible, lonely love in it, twisted all out of true but love. "You have not asked me what I want," Beatrice said. "I do not care what you want." "No, but you will hear it, because it is shorter than you think." Beatrice folded her hands, one over the other, the thumb flat, and she said it as levelly as she had said no to the Duke across the cold supper table, 3 refusals ago and a lifetime. "I want the almshouse safe, past recall. Vested in the inmates the management beyond any patron's reach, which is to say beyond your reach, and beyond your nephew's, and beyond mine. That is all I have ever wanted from Westmere. I do not want his fortune. I do not want his name. I came here this morning to warn him that you had set the county on him, and then to take myself out of his way, Because you are right about one thing, your ladyship, and only one. A man cannot rebuild a wrecked name, while the parish is whispering that his charity is a kept woman's price. So you need not threaten me. I was leaving before you opened your mouth, but I will not leave those old women to be turned onto the Tadwick Road for your terrace. And there is no paragraph in any paper that will make me. For the first time, the Marchioness was quiet. Something moved behind the beautiful, composed face. Surprise, perhaps, that the managing female had a position and not merely a passion. And then it was gone, smoothed over, and she rose at last, in a long fall of grey silk, and crossed to a writing table by the cold hearth, and took up a document that lay there ready, and Beatrice understood that this, too, had been prepared in advance, that nothing in this room was unplanned. "You are a better creature than I expected," the Marchioness said. "Which is unfortunate, because it will make this harder for you to refuse, and I have not the time to be gentle about it." She held the paper out. "The almshouse land is not my nephew's to settle. That is the thing none of you clever people thought to check. His father, who was a fool, but not in every particular, settled the Hartley acres on me, on my separate use, for my life. In the year he withdrew your father's subscription, as a provision against my widowhood. The land under your precious roof is mine, Miss Hartley, not the estate's. Mine. My nephew may draw all the irrevocable instruments his blue stocking dictates. He cannot give away what he does not own. I can put your old women on the Tadwick Road tomorrow morning, and there is not a court in England that will stop me." She let that land. She was very good at letting things land. "Or I can sign the land over to your trust. Irrevocable, vested in the inmates, exactly as you have so cleverly drawn it. This morning, before my nephew rides in, the almshouse safe forever, past my reach and his, on one condition." "Name it," Beatrice said, though she knew. She had known from the moment the woman rose. "Leave the parish, today. Quietly, without a scene, without a farewell to him. A letter, if you must, but a cold one, a final one, the sort a sensible woman writes when she has thought better of an unsuitable connection. Let him believe you never cared for him at all, that the roof and the trust were always business, and the rest his own imagining. Let him be humiliated, briefly, and recover, and marry the Carstairs girl and her £40,000, and rebuild his name, and be in 10 years exactly the Duke his father was not. That is my price for your old women's roof, their safety against your going. Decide quickly, I hear his horse." And from the avenue, faint and then less faint, came the sound of a single horse on the gravel, unhurried, coming home. Beatrice looked at the paper in the Marchioness's hand. The land, the real land, the thing she had fought for all summer, settled past recall on the only terms that could ever make it safe, lying there ready to sign. And she looked at the door through which Adrian would come in a moment in his shirt sleeves, with the morning on him, not yet knowing that the county had turned, not yet knowing that his aunt held the ground he had spent the summer believing was his to give. And she understood that she had spent the whole summer learning to refuse the wrong Westmere, and that now, at the last, she was being offered the one thing she could not refuse. Because to refuse it was to put Mrs. Pell on the Tadwick Road, and she would sooner cut off her own hand. "Give me the pen," she said. She signed it standing at the cold writing table, with the horse's hooves loud now on the gravel outside, and the Marchioness's emerald glinting at the edge of her sight, and her own name going onto the deed, in the same hand she had not been able to make sign the Duke's instrument the night before. The land passed to the trust. The old women were safe, past recall forever. And the price of it was a letter she would write that afternoon, cold and final, and the back of a man she had refused 3 times, and learned, somewhere between the first refusal and the last, too. She did not let herself finish the thought. She folded her hands, one over the other, the thumb pressed flat, and she walked out of the cold hall by the garden door as the great front door opened on the other side of it, and she heard, behind her, the Duke of Westmere come into his own house calling her name, calling Miss Hartley. And then, when no one answered, calling Beatrice once, into the empty hall, and she did not turn back. She went out through the wild summer garden, past the blown roses and the shaggy box and the loose terrace step his father had never mended, and down the avenue under the loud limes, with the deed signed and the almshouse safe and her heart, which she had been so careful of all summer, breaking quietly and entirely in her chest, where no one could see it. She wrote the letter that afternoon. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, harder than burying her father, because burying her father had not required her to lie. She made it cold, she made it final. She wrote that she had reconsidered the unsuitable warmth of their acquaintance, that the trust was now settled and required no further intimacy between its patron and its founder's daughter, that she thanked his grace for the roof, and wished him every happiness in the marriage his rank required, and that she would be gone from the parish before he received it to a cousin in the next county, and begged he would not write. She read it over once. She did not weep on it. She could not afford to blot it. She sealed it, and gave it to Halloway to carry up to the court, when she was an hour gone, and she packed her father's papers and her mother's amber gown into a single trunk, and she left the cottage where she had been born, in the long gold evening of a summer day, with the swift screaming high over the church, and the dust soft and warm under the wheels, and she did not look back, because she had learned that summer that looking back was the thing that undid you, and she could not afford, now, to be undone. The cousin's house at Combe Marsh was a low grey farm 20 miles off, where her mother's people kept sheep and asked no questions, and Beatrice arrived in the dark, and was given a narrow bed under the eaves, and lay in it, that first night, listening to a clock she did not know, strike the hours she did know. She thought she had braced for everything. She had not braced for how completely the silence would arrive. No almshouse, no old women, no hammering on the north slope, no horse in the lane at dawn. She had cut herself off from the whole of it in an afternoon, and it had cost one signature and one letter, and now it was done, and the doing of it sat on her chest like a stone. She let herself, in that narrow bed, believe the worst of him, because believing the worst was the only thing that made the leaving bearable. He had wanted the land. That was the truth, under all the roses. She made herself say it plainly in the dark. He had courted her precisely as far as the trust required, and not 1 inch further, and the warmth she had felt coming back across the summer garden had been a thing she had built herself, out of loneliness and 4 hard winters, and hung upon a man who had never offered it. He would read her cold letter and be, after the first sting, relieved. He would marry the Carstairs girl and her £40,000 before the leaves turned. He would not, in 5 years, remember the name of the parson's daughter, who had managed his charity, and then sensibly gone, the lavender in the garden, and the laugh she had not meant to give, and the look of him with cobweb in his black hair. All of it had been business to him, as it ought to have been business to her, and she had simply been fool enough to mistake a duke's good management of a tenant for something a duke would never spend on a woman of no fortune. She had been a season's convenience. She made herself believe it, fully, in the dark, the way you press hard on a wound to stop it bleeding, and she did not weep. Because weeping would have been to admit there was something to weep for, and she had decided there was not. In the morning the cousin's wife put her to work, which was a mercy, and she took it, and she did not write to anyone, and she did not ask whether a letter had come, and when the carrier brought the county paper on the Tuesday, she put it on the fire unread. The almshouse was safe. The old women had their roof past any recall. She had got the one thing she had ever wanted from Westmere, and the getting of it had emptied her out so thoroughly that she went about the grey farm for a week, like a woman recovering from a long illness, careful on the stairs, surprised by her own hands. She had won. She told herself she had won over and over, in the rhythm of the churn and the scrubbing board, until the words wore smooth and meant nothing. And still, at 4 in the morning, when the unfamiliar clock struck and the lambs called on the dark hill, she lay with her hands folded one over the other, the thumb pressed flat, refusing, for the 4th time and the worst, to let herself want the thing she could not have. The days at Combe Marsh ran into one another, grey and useful. She learned the rhythm of the dairy and the names of the cousins' children, and the particular complaint of the gate at the bottom of the long meadow, which wanted oiling and which she oiled, because mending a thing that could be mended was the only comfort she had left, and she took it where she found it. She did not let herself reckon the weeks. She knew, distantly, the way one knows the date of a thing one is determined not to attend, that somewhere across the county the banns for a duke and a Carstairs heiress would be going up on a board by a church door, and that she had purchased that match with her own going as surely as if she had drawn the settlements herself, and she folded the knowledge small and put it where she put the rest, and went on oiling the gate. It was Halloway who broke the silence, 3 weeks gone, with a letter she had not given him leave to write. She nearly burned it unread, as she had burned the newspapers, but it was Edmund's hand, and Edmund had carried her cold letter up to the court with his own grey face, and so she owed him the reading of one, and she sat on the meadow step in the evening light, and opened it, and read it, and went very still. He had not married, Edmund wrote. The Carstairs settlements had been drawn, and then, on the day they were to be signed, sent back unsigned, with 3 words across the top in the Duke's own hand that the solicitor's clerk had repeated in every tavern in the riding. No, and again, no. He had turned the Dowager Marchioness of Steyne out of Westmere Court, bag, diamonds, and dove-grey silk, within the hour of learning what she had done, and she had gone to Bath, where she was telling everyone who would listen that her nephew had run mad, and no one in Bath, it seemed, much cared. He had read Beatrice's cold letter, Edmund wrote, and he had said nothing about it to anyone, and he carried it in his coat, and he had asked Edmund once, only once, in a voice Edmund did not like to remember, whether she had seemed, when she wrote it, like a woman who meant it. And Edmund had told him the truth, which was that he did not know, and that he had wondered the same thing himself. He has not ridden out at dawn since you left, Edmund finished. The roof you saved is the soundest in the parish. And I think, Bea, though it is not my business, that you told that letter a lie, and that he knows it is a lie, and is too proud and too afraid of being his father to come 20 miles and call you on it. One of you will have to be braver than your pride. It will not be him. He has been refused too many times to risk a 4th. I am sorry to say it is going to have to be you. She sat on the meadow step until the light was gone off the hill, and the lambs had stopped calling, with Edmund's letter open on her knee, and her own folded hands gone slack for the first time all summer, and she made herself, at last, do the thing she had refused to do in the dark at 4 in the morning. She made herself want it. She made it herself say, plainly, into the falling dark, the truth she had been pressing hard on all these weeks, to keep it from bleeding. That she had not built the warmth herself out of loneliness, that it had been real and shared and witnessed in 100 small unbought things. The storm he sat through with Mrs. Dyce's hand in his, the lavender, the listening, and that she had thrown it on the fire of her own pride and her father's fear and called the burning sensible. She had refused the Duke 3 times for the almshouse, and she had been right each time. And then she had refused him a 4th, in a cold letter, for no better reason than that she was afraid to be the one who reached. And that refusal had been a lie, and it had cost them both a summer, and she was the only one of them, with the standing left to take it back. She went back the next morning. She did not write ahead to warn anyone, because warning ahead was how you gave the other person time to build a wall, and she had spent a summer learning what walls cost. She borrowed the cousin's gig and drove the 20 miles herself in the early light, through the high summer country with the wheat going gold at the edges, and the dust soft and warm and white in the lanes. And she rehearsed nothing, because there was nothing to rehearse. There was only the one true thing to say, and she would either be brave enough to say it, or she would not, and no rehearsal had ever yet made a coward brave. She went to the almshouse first. She told herself it was because the almshouse was hers, and the court was not. But the truth was simpler, and she made herself own it. She was not yet brave enough to drive straight up to a man's door and unsay a lie, and she wanted to stand a moment in the one place where she had always known exactly who she was. The roof was sound. The water stain was a pale ghost. Mrs. Pell was in the garden in the sun with her knitting, and she looked up at the sound of the gig, and she did not seem in the least surprised, which from Mrs. Pell was its own kind of welcome. "You went and oiled some gate in the next county," the old woman said, when there was a man 20 miles off, rusting solid for the want of you. "Sit down, Miss Beatrice. You look a fright. No, do not sit down. He rides the chalk track above the long meadow every morning since you left. The under-gardener says, the way a dog walks the road its master went. You will catch him if you go now, and do not stop to be sensible about it. You have been sensible at that man for 3 months, and look where it has got the pair of you." She picked up her knitting again. "Go on, the almshouse will keep. We kept ourselves before there was ever a duke about the place, and we shall keep ourselves after, and in between. We should all of us very much like to see the two of you stop being noble at each other long enough to be happy. Go." So she went. She left the gig at the foot of the chalk track, and climbed it on foot into the wind off the high down, with the larks going up invisible above her, and the whole green country falling away on either hand. And she saw him before he saw her. A rider stopped at the crest against the morning sky, his horse cropping the short turf, the man himself sitting it still as a figure on a coin, looking out over the parish the way a man looks at a thing he has lost and cannot stop returning to. He had her cold letter. She knew, because Edmund had told her, that he carried it. He had turned his aunt out of his house, and sent the heiress's settlements back unsigned, with 3 words across the top. He had not married. He had done all of that on the strength of believing the worst of her letter, and refusing, even so, to act as though it were true. And she had driven 20 miles in a borrowed gig to tell him that his disbelief had been right, and her letter had been the lie. He saw her then. She watched him go still. Stiller than the stillness of a moment before, the stillness of a man who does not trust his own eyes. And then he was down off the horse, and the reins were dropped, and he was coming down the track toward her with the wind taking his black hair, and he stopped a yard off, near enough that she could see the cobweb grey at his temple that had not been there in the spring. And he did not touch her, and he did not say her name. And the first thing the Duke of Westmere said to her after a summer's silence was, "Is it true, what you wrote? I have carried it 3 weeks and read it 40 times, and I cannot make it sound like your hand. The words are yours, the voice is not. Tell me to my face that you reconsidered the unsuitable warmth of our acquaintance. And I will believe it, because I have never once known you to lie, and I will take myself off this hill and trouble you no further. But you must say it to my face. I am owed that much. I will not be sent away by a paragraph in your own hand, any more than I would be kept by one in my aunt's. And there it was, the moment to be brave or not." She folded her hands one over the other, the thumb pressed flat, the old gesture, the wall gesture, the thing her hands did when they were holding something in. And then, deliberately, the way you set down a weight you have carried so long you have forgotten it was ever a choice. She unfolded them. It was a lie, she said, every word of it. Your aunt holds the almshouse land. Your father settled it on her, for her life, the year he broke my father. You never owned the ground you spent the summer offering to give me, and neither of us knew it. She would have put the old women on the Tadwick Road by nightfall. She offered to settle the land on the trust, irrevocably, exactly as I had drawn it, safe forever past her reach and yours, on one condition. That I go that day without a word to you, and write you a letter cold enough that you would believe I had never cared, and marry your heiress and rebuild your name. I signed her deed. I took her price. I wrote you the coldest thing I have ever written, and I made it final, and I meant you to believe it. The wind took the words, and she said them louder into it, so there could be no mistaking them. And I told myself, in the dark every night since, that it had been business to you all along, because believing that was the only way I could bear the leaving. That was the real lie, Adrian, not the letter. The letter only lied to you, that one I told to myself. I knew it was a lie when I wrote it, and I held to it anyway, because I was afraid, not of your aunt. I had already faced your aunt. Afraid of being the one who reached, and was not caught. She drew a breath that the wind nearly took from her. I have refused you 3 times for that almshouse, and I was right every time. And then I refused you a 4th for nothing but my own fear, and that one was a sin, and I have driven 20 miles to take it back. I did not reconsider the warmth of our acquaintance. I have thought of nothing else. I am not sorry for the deed. I would sign it again to save them. But I am sorry for the letter, and I am done being sensible at you. And if you have any use left for a parson's daughter of no fortune, and a great deal of unmanageable pride, you had better say so on this Gishill, in this wind, because I have spent the whole of my courage getting up it, and I shall not have enough left to climb it twice. For a moment he did not move at all, and the larks sang, and her heart climbed into her throat. I have a use for her, Adrian said, and his voice was not steady, which she had never heard, not once, in all their cold and clever exchanges. I have wanted exactly one thing since the evening you laughed at me in your ruined kitchen and tried to take it back. Not the land. Not the trust. You, the whole managing, refusing, unmanageable, 20-mile driving rest of you. I sent the heiress away because I could not stand in a church and promise £40,000 the thing I had already, without meaning to, and without your leave, given to a woman who would not so much as take my money. He closed the last yard. He took her unfolded hands in both of his, lime dust and cobweb gone, only the warmth of them now in the cold wind. Refuse me as often as you like for the rest of our lives, Beatrice. Refuse me at breakfast. I find I have grown fond of it. Only do not, ever again, refuse me by post. Say it to my face, the way you have always said everything else, and I will bear any no in the world from your own mouth. But marry me. Be the Duchess who will not take charity and makes me pay every debt I owe. I am asking on a hill in the wind because I have no roses left that you have not already seen me ruin, and because I find I would rather be refused by you in the open air than accepted by anyone else in a drawing room. There it is, the whole of it. Now refuse me or do not. I do not, she said. I do not refuse you. And she heard herself laugh. The short, surprised laugh she had given him in the ruined kitchen, the one she had tried so hard to take back, and this time she let it go, up into the wind with the larks. And she did not take it back at all. He kissed her on the chalk down, with the whole green parish spread out below them, and not a soul to see but a horse, and a sky full of larks, and it was nothing like business. And they both knew it, and there was no wall left between them by so much as a single brick. The Dowager Marchioness of Steyne came to the almshouse a fortnight later, which no marchioness had ever done, because no marchioness had ever had cause to. She came alone, in a plain travelling carriage, and not the great Stain coach, in grey silk without the diamonds, and she came up the garden path between the old women's vegetable beds, with her chin level and her step less certain than it had been in the cold hall. An old woman in an enemy's garden, and Beatrice, who was at the long table going over the trust's first quarter of accounts, set down her pen and rose, and did not curtsy, and the two of them looked at each other across the room, where the water stain was a pale ghost on the mended ceiling. "I will not keep you long," the Marchioness said. "I am told you are to be the next Duchess of Westmere, and that my nephew turned me out of his house to make room for the prospect, and that the whole county thinks me a monster, in which the county is, for once, very nearly correct." She came to the table. She didn't sit. She had never once, in any of their meetings, sat. She drew from her reticule a folded document, heavy with a seal, and she laid it on the table between them. On the bare scrubbed wood within, Beatrice's reach, the way a duke had once laid a bank draft on a supper table in this same room, and she did not push it across, but left it lying where it fell. "I have had my settlement of the Hartley land examined by a lawyer who is not my creature, the first I have employed in 30 years. It was sound. I could have held the ground under your feet for the rest of my life, and made your trust a tenant at my pleasure, and I had every intention a fortnight ago of doing exactly that, of signing it to your inmates and keeping the reversion, so that the safety I sold you would have died with me, and the land come back to the terrace I had planned. That is the deed I drew. This is a different one." Beatrice picked it up. The seal was the Stain seal. She unfolded it and read, and the lore of it was dense and old, but the operative clause was plain, and she read it aloud into the quiet room, because some things must be said in the air to be believed. The whole of the Hartley acres, in fee simple absolute, to the trustees of the almshouse and their successors forever, without reservation, reversion, or any estate whatsoever retained to the grantor or her heirs. Past recall, past a death, past everything. The ground itself given away clean, with nothing kept back. I dressed for my own daughter's burying in that grey silk you have seen me wear all summer, the Marchioness said, and her voice did not break, but it went very flat, the flatness of a thing held hard. She was 17. She married against my advising. A poor man, a clever one, a man with nothing but his mind and his pride. Exactly the sort I have spent my life teaching young men to set aside for £40,000, and I cut her off for it, to bring her to her senses, and she did not come to her senses. She died of a fever in his cheap lodgings, with my letters unanswered on her table, and I never once told her that I had been wrong. I have spent 30 years being certain, so that I should never again have to feel what it is to have been certain and wrong about the only thing that mattered." She looked at Beatrice, and the magnificent face was the undone face. From the portrait end of the cold hall, the one Beatrice had been meant not to see. "I looked at you across that hall, and I saw her, the same poverty, the same pride, the same clever, stubborn refusing, and I set out to do to you exactly what I did to her, to break a thing because I could not control it, and I very nearly succeeded, and the only reason I did not is that you were braver than she was, or than I let her be, and you drove 20 miles back. She drew the second deed, thought up like a stone from a well. I am too old to be forgiven, and I have not come to ask it. I have come to give back the ground, because it is the one thing I can still do that cannot be taken back, and because I find I cannot bear to be, at the very end, the thing I made of myself." She folded her gloved hands once briefly, and then she said the whole of her apology, which was 4 words and her own, and cost her everything. "I am sorry, child." "I know you are," Beatrice said. She set the deed down on the scrubbed table, gently, the way you set down a thing that has cost the giver more than its weight, and I will not tell you it was nothing, because it was very nearly everything, and a lie now would dishonor your daughter more than the truth. But I will tell you this. You are wrong that you are too old to be forgiven. You came up a garden path into your enemy's house, alone, in plain silk, and gave away the one weapon you had left, to a woman you cannot control and will never like. And that is not the act of a monster. That is the act of a woman who has decided, at the very end, to be her daughter's mother, after all. She drew out the chair across the table. The chair a duke had once sat in to watch her read an instrument. Sit down, your ladyship. You have come a long way for it. The tea is fresh. Sit, and tell me her name. No one in this parish knows it, and someone ought to, now that the land she might have lived poor and happy on belongs to 12 old women who will say it in their prayers if I ask them. Sit. And the Dowager Marchioness of Steyne, who had not sat down in that room, or any room of her enemies in 50 years, sat down at the scrubbed table in the mended almshouse, and told her. And Beatrice listened the way Adrian had once listened to her in the garden, with her whole attention and no impatience at all. And the water stain dried a little paler on the ceiling overhead, and the summer went on, warm and gold outside the open door. They were married from the parish church in the last week of August, when the wheat was in, and the evening still came down long and gold over the downs, and Beatrice walked to her own wedding, because the church was a quarter mile from the cottage where she was born, and it seemed foolish to ride. She wore the amber gown that had been her mother's, the only good thing she owned, and Mrs. Pell, who had dressed a duchess for 30 years, was permitted at last to dress one more, and pronounced her, with the relish of the very old, the least troublesome bride she had ever turned out, considering. The Dowager Marchioness of Steyne sat in the Westmere pew in grey silk, and once, when the parsons spoke of two becoming one flesh, she pressed a gloved knuckle very briefly to the corner of her eye, and looked at no one, and no one was unkind enough to look at her. The terrace at Westmere Court still had its loose step. Adrian had not mended it, all that long summer of the roof, though he had mended a great many other things. And on the evening they came home married, with the swifts screaming high over the court and the limes loud with bees, Beatrice stopped at it. The loose stone that matched the loose stone at the almshouse, the one his father had meant to mend and run out of years. You never had it seen to, she said. I was waiting, he said, to see whether the difference between a pledge and a payment ran in the family after all. My father meant to mend it and ran out of years. I have not run out of years. I have only been waiting for a reason to be sure I would spend them on the payment and not the pledge. He looked at her, the last gold light on the amber of her gown and the cobweb grey at his own temple, and the corner of his mouth moved, the dry, small move she had laughed at in a ruined kitchen a summer ago. I have one. Now mind the step, Duchess. We will have it mended in the morning. In the morning, she agreed, and took his hand, and stepped over the loose stone into the house. And they had it mended, in the morning, the both of them watching the mason set it true, and it did not rock again under any foot for the whole of their long lives.